Welcome, welcome, come on in. The show's about to begin. Grab your seat and feel the nostalgia grow. Sit tight, relax, and enjoy the ride. We're so glad you're here. Let's go. It's time for Let's Play with AppleMatt.
The mayhem of western towns was kept in check by local ordinances requiring cowpunchers to check their guns when they arrived. So fights were most often contests with fists or long knives. When a cowpuncher checked his guns with a clerk or bartender, he received a ticket with which to claim his weapons when he was ready to leave town. If he didn't check it, he could land in jail. The interior of an Old West jail may have been plain, like the one through this barred window. The jailbreaks were often colorful. In 1877, at Fort Griffin, Doc Holliday slit open the belly of a gambler named Ed Bailey and was taken to the local jail. Doc's girlfriend, Kate Elder, realized a lynch mob was forming and decided to break Doc out of jail. She set fire to a makeshift barn, and when the whole town went to see the blaze, including 2 or 3 officers guarding the jail, Kate walked into the jail and got old Doc out. That night, Kate and Doc hid in the willows, and the next day they rode to Dodge City. Doc Holliday felt a debt to Kate from that day on. The people on these posters were fair game for anyone who wanted to try and apprehend them, and often the law wasn't particular about whether a man was brought to justice dead or alive. Bounty hunters were a common sight in the Old West. It was a dangerous occupation that attracted ex-soldiers, former lawmen, anyone who was willing to live by his wits and his gun for the chance of a reward. Many men, perhaps Wyatt Earp, walked on both sides of the law, committing crimes or keeping the peace, as it suited them. The interior of an Old West jail may have been plain, like the one. For many Western lawmen, wearing a badge didn't interfere with maintaining a profitable, parallel career as an outlaw. In fact, some towns deliberately hired an infamous gunslinger as their sheriff, on the assumption that he could intimidate lesser troublemakers into behaving themselves. Your lawman's job wasn't really all that glamorous, nor was his salary very high, but the fringe benefits were great. The job was a real fine springboard into politics, if you were so inclined. Also, a sheriff got to keep a percentage of all the taxes he collected, and that could amount to quite a bit in boom towns. For example, Wyatt Earp's longtime rival, Sheriff Johnny Behan, was said to pull in some $40,000 a year that way. And every one of them dollars went a long way in 1881. For the most part, folks used potbelly stoves to keep public buildings like hotels, depots, stores, and, yep, even jails warm. A big stack of wanted posters like this was a common sight just about anywhere you looked in 1880s America, but especially in the rough and tumble western states. If a sheriff or marshal wanted to put out a reward on a man or woman, he'd usually contact the folks at the local newspaper office, who did double duty by printing things like wanted posters and official documents on their presses. In order to join the likes of Jesse James, Black Bart, and Billy the Kid on a wanted poster, you had to commit a pretty serious crime, like stagecoach robbing, cattle rustling, or murder. A good lantern came in real handy, especially when you had a house full of drunks, horse thieves, and hooligans. If the lights went out, who knows what they'd try. Concentrating on paperwork and keeping a ledger like this one usually fell on the shoulders of the sheriff. The sheriff would keep records of reimbursements due to him by the county in these ledgers as well. Daily work of a sheriff included inspecting horse brands, looking for stray livestock, and occasionally serving arrest warrants. Wyatt Earp once said, "Folks think being a lawman is all shooting and running fast horses after desperados. Hell, it's usually about as exciting as watching your dog sleep in the noonday sun." These skeleton keys were a common sight just about everywhere, including jails in the 1880s. The locks they fit were simple. So simple, in fact, that they could be opened with a variety of objects other than their key. That's why jailers had to search their prisoners very thoroughly before they put them in their cell, because the cell lock could be picked and opened with just about anything they had in their pockets. Of course, sometimes the keys were used to keep the bad guys out instead of in. Like the time one Tombstone newspaper editor was fined for contempt of court, but took jail time instead, just to prove a point. He edited his newspaper from his cell and greatly enjoyed all the publicity it gave him. After a few weeks, his friends came and bailed him out, but the editor refused to leave. Finally, the sheriff had to throw him out and lock the jail door to prevent his return. Besides gossip, newspapers were just about the only source of information for both lawmen and ordinary folk in the Old West. It was in the newspaper that you could find information about what was happening in town, who did what to whom, and who had gotten arrested lately. In one typical month in Tombstone, Virgil Earp and his deputies arrested about 48 people. 18 arrests were for charges of being drunk and disorderly, while 14 were for disturbing the peace. Only 8 arrests involved violence of any sort. Kind of less than you might have thought. The rest of the crimes were for deeds like petty theft and reckless buggy driving. With all the papers he handled, a sheriff needed a good paperweight to hold them all down. Because if he wasn't dealing with paperwork in his own county, he was dealing with paperwork created by other sheriffs in other counties. For example, after the OK Corral gunfight, Morgan Earp got murdered. So Wyatt and Doc Holliday went out for revenge, killing Frank Stillwell, the man they believed to be responsible, at the Tucson train station. Now, the law didn't much like that, so Wyatt and Doc hightailed it out of there, and Doc went to Colorado. Well, Arizona tried to get Colorado to send Doc, or John Henry Holliday, back so he could face charges of murder in the first degree. Colorado didn't send him back, but jailed him for 15 days instead, while Doc's friends in high places did some fancy footwork and got him free. After all that, the sheriff in Arizona had to pay Colorado $20 for Doc's jail time. To try to keep things calm in Tombstone, Virgil and Wyatt Earp decreed that folks should not carry guns in town. All the parties were supposed to deposit their firearms at the sheriff's office. Now, this was in theory. In practice, no one did. In fact, the Earp brothers' first recorded attempt to enforce this law was the final challenge that started those bullets flying at the OK Corral. It took a special kind of rope to hang a person right. Most proper hangman's nooses were made from hand-woven hemp rope. This rope was well oiled to strengthen the rope and ensure that it would stretch and not break when its victim's full weight fell on it. Rifles were a popular choice for the lawman trying to hunt down fugitive criminal. The longer the metal barrel, the more accurately you can shoot. The inside of the barrel has spiral grooves cut into it, which helps the bullet shoot straight. In fact, the word rifle comes from the French word rifler, which means to scrape or scratch. The lawman didn't have to have a fancy diploma to get a job in law enforcement. You see, criminals were much more impressed by brawn than brains. Lawmen like the Earps occasionally received requests for help from sheriffs in neighboring areas, who'd wire something like, "Outlaw Curly Bill escaped from Tucson. Stop. Headed east toward Huachuca Mountains. Stop. Please intercept." Wyatt might not know where the Huachuca Mountains were, but this map would sure tell him. You'd keep a pitcher and wash basin around for washing your face and body. It was a simple operation. The pitcher was kept full of clean water, which you poured into the basin. Then you used your hands to scoop water out of the basin and splash it on your face. Bottles like this were often filled with ink. Paperwork and bureaucracy was a major part of a lawman's job, and the county purchasing agent often bought ink by the gallon. The sheriff's job was a good start for a man interested in politics, and some men used it to become rich. William Breckinridge, the Cochise County deputy sheriff, claimed the post was worth $40,000 a year, as the sheriff was allowed 10% of tax collections. Many men gazed from this window as a gallows was being built to hang them. Hanging was a common means of execution in the Old West, and people were hung from trees, bridges, and lampposts. In Tombstone, men were often hung from the crosspiece of a telegraph pole. It took skill to tie a knot that would break a man's neck when he was dropped from a gallows. Often the men being hanged were choked to death, or were, in a few cases, decapitated. This man was arrested for breaking up the Cantina Saloon while drunk. Drunkenness was the most common reason men and women were arrested in the West. Your reward's a silver dollar for the right answer to my question. Besides getting robbed from time to time, banks of the Old West performed a number of duties. For example, gold miners wanted to exchange their gold dust for U.S. currency, since that dust was even easier to rob than the bank was. So, in towns without an assay office, the bank would trade you your cash for your gold dust. A town's bank would also control much of its real estate holdings, either by way of mortgage loans or through some form of trust. It would be the dispatch and delivery point for stagecoaches carrying trunks of gold, silver, and banknotes. And given how popular it was to rob them stagecoaches, a rare recreational opportunity in the cultural disadvantaged West, a bank would often be the one to put up the reward for capturing a notorious robber, murderer, or other desperado. So, take a look around the bank, but don't get any ideas now. In a ledger like this one, bankers kept accurate records of how much gold or silver the bank bought from the local miners. They'd weigh the diggings, recording the weight and value in the ledger. Then, they'd give the miners either cash or a bill of exchange, what I like calling an IOU. The miners would send these IOUs to family or loved ones back east or in Europe. Once an IOU arrived, it could be exchanged for cash. The banks made a lot of money off these transactions by controlling the value of the stuff, and there was nothing a miner could do about it. Sorry, partner. These here are confidential bank documents. Afraid I can't let you see them. Trade secrets, you know. This ledger was used to keep track of the money people had been saving in this bank. This made things a lot easier on the local merchants, because before the banks were holding your money, merchants were once expected to accept and store money. This made them quite a target for being robbed. These are records from a local business that was loaned money by this bank. This embossing machine helped protect bank checks against forgery. It printed the amount onto the check's surface while also embossing or pressing the numbers right into the check. That way, people could make sure it was authentic just by feel. Now, machines weren't used on all financial documents of the time, so forgery was a real problem. One Arizona outlaw faked some documents that gave him claim to 11 million acres of land. His gambit was foiled when the newspaper reporter caught wind of it. In Wyatt Earp's day, copied documents like these were written out longhand or pecked out on them newfangled typing machines, 'cause every transaction was written down, and everything written down was copied. At least that's how it was done when the banks were honest. This stack contains money orders first introduced in 1864 during the Civil War. They provided a way for Union soldiers and their families to send funds back and forth through the mail without the risk of sending paper money that anyone could steal. The average amount of money order sent that first year was $5.18. Many people thought Wyatt Earp was a mighty fine man for upholding the law, but others say he did it for the money. You see, he received a share of all the tax money that he collected from those citizens who didn't want to pay. And he made quite a bit at times. He probably handed it over to the local banker to put in a vault like this. Sorry, partner. You can't open this here vault unless you have the combination. Now, keep looking. It's somewhere around town. Western bankers were sometimes suspected of having cold hearts, but that didn't mean that they wanted blue knuckles to go with them. The banker might have stoked up this stove to get you to warm to the interest rate he was offering, or maybe just to make his customers more comfortable. President Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, was assassinated when Wyatt Earp was just a young man of 17. Lincoln is remembered for bringing America into the modern world by freeing the Southern slaves in 1863. And of course he led the Union side to victory in the Civil War. Honest Abe, they called him. And he was so loved by our country that a national holiday was set aside in his honor. Some things never change, like bankers accounting for every little thing. Sure, the banks controlled the money in everyone's pocket, but they also had fingers in other pies, like the real estate listed in this ledger. Banks were also safe resting spots for more than a few civic documents as well. Back in the vaults, you'd find the town charter and all its property maps. Everyone trusted banks to help them buy property by helping them get mortgage loans or maybe giving them credit, a handshake. Mostly, the banks worked mighty hard to serve the townsfolk and safeguard their hard-earned money. This is a pile of loans waiting for the bank manager's approval. Some of the things a person wanted to do would require starting up money, whether the enterprise was honest or not. A banker might be one of the few folks who had a college diploma like this one. But things were changing back in the East, changes that would eventually make it West. You see, America's new industrial fortunes were getting plowed into founding new universities, which were turning out a whole mess of new graduates. By 1870, America had more colleges, law, and medical schools than all the countries of Europe. A banker might be one of the few folks who had a college. Though Wyatt Earp and others like him were helping keep things a bit wild out here, America's economy was being tamed and modernized by paperwork. Earlier, in the 19th century, barter had been the country's most common means of exchange. But by Earp's time, it had given way to national currency, banknotes, bills of exchange, checks, and investment certificates like these. Just plain old paper, but worth its weight in gold. This embossing machine helped protect bank checks against forgery. It printed the amount onto the check surface while also embossing or pressing the numbers right into the check. That way, people could make sure it was authentic, just by feel. Now, machines weren't used on all financial documents of the time. Partner, if you answer my question true, I have a silver dollar for you. You've always heard that frontier justice is tough. Once Wyatt Earp had to break up a fight between a judge and a defense attorney. While you're here, have a look-see. At the desk of any law person, you might find petitions such as these, which were from Tombstone. Feel free to browse at your leisure. Courthouses weren't always so pretty, but in the Wild West, a nice building was often a symbol of stability. Still, outlaws like to burn them down, sometimes to destroy evidence, but most often just out of plain cussedness. And as far as the judges were concerned, many of them were drunkards or eccentrics who could barely read or write. There was even one judge who used to keep a mail order catalog on his bench. When it came time to pick a fine, he opened up that catalog and said, $4.88. When the defendant protested, his lawyer said, be thankful he opened it at pants instead of pianos. Here's the courthouse, partner. Catch it while you can. A western town might have been around for years before it even built a courthouse. So circuit judges would often have to hear their cases in the same saloons where the original indiscretion had begun. Talk about a full-service establishment. Then there was the quality of them judges. Well, you'll find out more about them here. I seem to recall that in Tombstone there was a notoriously hard-drinking lawyer named Allen English. Once when he appeared in court drunk, a judge fined him $25 for contempt of court. Your Honor, said English, $25 wouldn't pay for half the contempt I have for this court. Well, partner, I believe your case is up next. It's a little-known fact that Wyatt, even while he was a lawman, was also the secretary and charter member of a Tombstone volunteer fire company. But, in spite of the best efforts of the townsfolk, Tombstone burned to the ground not once but twice. Belonging to a volunteer fire brigade in the Old West carried a lot of prestige. Everyone wanted to join. As a matter of fact, in Tombstone they had not one but 3 brigades. Every time there was a fire, the volunteers raced to be the first to the blaze. That's why only the fastest and strongest individuals were allowed to be volunteers. And instead of getting paid, volunteer firemen had to pay dues to belong. Fire alarms were non-existent in the early days of the frontier. To signal a fire in town, people would lean out the window and fire 3 pistol shots in rapid succession. Of course, in a gun-happy town like Tombstone, it was sometimes hard to tell the fire alarm from a friendly disagreement. Eventually, to the relief of the town's better citizens, bells and steam whistles replaced gunfire. Bet you won't believe this one. John Clum, Tombstone's mayor, went to New York to buy one of those newfangled fire engines. On his way home, he spotted smoke coming from Tombstone. And always thinking of ways to get folks to come to town, he tried to convince his fellow passengers that they had a live volcano in Tombstone.